Chapter 1: An Invitation to the River. You do not need to do anything right now. You do not need to hold on to any thought, any plan, any unfinished thing from the day. Whatever you are carrying as you lay down tonight, the appointments, the worries, the small frictions of the world, you can let those things rest beside you now. They will still be there if you need them. But for the next 2 hours, they do not need you. All that is asked of you is to lie still, to breathe, to let the weight of your body sink a little deeper into whatever is beneath you. And to follow me very gently, without effort, to a place far away. Not in space exactly. In time, we are going back through centuries, back through the lives of everyone who has slept and woken and slept again before you, back past the great rivers of recorded history, back to the warm valley of the Nile, in the time when the desert air smelled of hot stone and river mud, and something older than memory. It is approximately 1300 years before the Common Era. The 19th dynasty of the New Kingdom of Egypt. The reign of the pharaoh who will later be remembered as, or nearby in time to him, a period when Egypt is at the full height of its power and strangeness and beauty. The Valley of the Kings is being carved out of the limestone cliffs to the west of Thebes. The great temple at Karnak is being expanded, always being expanded, always adding another gateway, another hall, another courtyard. The Nile is high. It has just receded from its annual flood, the flood the Egyptians called the inundation, and the black silt it has left behind is beginning to dry in the heat, rich and dark, and full of everything the fields need. The sun is going down, not set yet, not gone, but descending toward the western cliffs with the slow, heavy authority of a thing that has done this every day since before the world had anyone in it to watch. The light at this hour is extraordinary. You have perhaps seen this light yourself, in photographs, that particular orange gold that settles over stone and desert and water in the last 20 minutes before the sun disappears. In this time and this place, that light falls on walls and limestone columns and on the faces of people who are ending their day. A day that began, perhaps, 6 hours before dawn and will end, with luck, not long after the sun is down. We are going to spend the night here together, you and I. We are going to walk through the narrow streets of a workers' village on the western bank of the Nile. We are going to sit in the courtyard of a temple as the incense smoke rises. We are going to lie on a flat rooftop under stars that no light pollution has ever touched. We are going to hear the jackals calling from the desert edge, and the frogs along the Nile bank, and the slow drip of a water clock marking the hours of darkness. But first, before we go any further, if this kind of content is something you find restful, something that helps you settle and breathe and let go of the day, I want to ask you gently to subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video. It costs nothing except a moment, and those small actions genuinely help this channel reach more people who need exactly this. And if you have a moment before you fall asleep, write something in the comments. Tell me where you are in the world right now and what time it is where you are. I am always genuinely curious about that. I read the comments. I love to know who is out there in the dark listening. Now, we will travel back together. Close your eyes if you like, or let them go soft and unfocused, resting on the ceiling or the wall or whatever is in front of you. You do not need to try hard at this. Just breathe and follow. Chapter 2: The Last Light. The path is limestone dust, pale and fine, and your sandals, or the memory of sandals, the suggestion of walking, make almost no sound on it. You are on the western side of the Nile. That matters more than it might seem. The eastern bank of the Nile is the land of the living. That is where the towns are, where the fields spread out from the water's edge toward the eastern horizon. But the western bank is the direction the sun sets, the direction of the dead. The great necropolis is on the western bank. The Valley of the Kings is a few kilometers further west, tucked into a fold in the limestone cliffs where no one would accidentally find it. The workers' village of el-Medina is on the western bank too, in a narrow valley between two ranges of desert hills, close enough to the Valley of the Kings that the men can walk to work and back each day. This is where we are. The sun is perhaps 20 minutes from the edge of the western cliff. You can feel its angle changing. The shadows are growing very long now, impossibly long, stretching out ahead of you as you walk east toward the village. Your shadow is a thin dark line 10 times your height reaching out across the pale ground. There are men walking ahead of you on this path. 6, perhaps 8 of them. They are tired. You can see it in the way they carry themselves, the slight forward lean, the arms swinging a little heavily. They have been in the tomb since early morning. In the Valley of the Kings, deep inside the limestone cliff, cutting and carving and painting by the light of oil lamps, breathing the dust that hangs in the still air of sealed corridors. These are not slaves. That is one of the first things to understand about these men. Egypt in this period was a society of extraordinary complexity, and the workers of el-Medina occupied a particular and privileged position within it. They were state employees, skilled artisans, trained in painting and stone cutting, employed specifically and permanently for the work of cutting the royal tombs. They were paid by the state in rations, grain, measured in units called, along with oil, vegetables, fish from the Nile, and occasionally meat or wine. The foreman of the crew received 5.5 of emmer wheat per month, enough to live on and more. The ordinary craftsmen received 4. They had rights. They could petition the authorities. And when their wages were late, which happened, under the financial pressures of a declining empire later in this same dynasty, they could and did go on strike. But right now, they are simply walking home. The foreman of the left gang, in the el-Medina records, the workers were divided into a right gang and a left gang, each with its own foreman, a structure used to organize the two faces of the tomb corridor. The foreman of the left gang stops at the stone marker near the valley entrance and waits while his men pass. He is counting the tools. This was a daily ritual. The copper chisels and adzes and picks that the men used to cut the limestone were government property, carefully. At the end of each working day, the tools were collected and counted. The records survive. We can read them today on fragments of pottery and limestone flakes called ostraca that the scribes of the village used as notepaper and that the desert preserved almost perfectly for 3,000 years. So the foreman stands at the marker and accepts the chisels, one by one, counts them, satisfies himself that none have been left in the dark of the tomb or carried away. He nods. The men continue. The village is perhaps a 20-minute walk from the valley entrance. The path winds between low desert hills, crossing a saddle in the ridge. From the saddle, on a clear day, you can see the full width of the Nile Valley spread out below, the dark green strip of cultivation on either bank, and the ribbon of water gleaming in the middle distance, and the east bank with its towns and temple pylons, and the suggestion of life and noise. But right now the light is too low and too golden to see that far clearly. The east bank is a soft blur of color on the far side of the river. You crest the ridge, and the village comes into sight. From above, el-Medina looks unlike the grand images of ancient Egypt you might have in your mind. There are no columns here, no colossal statues, no wide processional avenues. The village is a compact settlement in a narrow valley, a grid of small houses pressed closely together, shoulder to shoulder, sharing walls where possible to conserve building material and to keep the interiors cooler. The houses are whitewashed, or many of them are, the whitewash renewed periodically to reflect the sun, and in this last golden light they glow a warm amber. Flat roofs, low doorways, narrow streets that are really just the gaps between house walls, barely wide enough for two people to pass. A wall surrounds the village, a proper enclosure wall, also its gate facing the main north-south path through the valley. The gate is still open at this hour. A few women are visible near it, watching the path for the returning workers. One of them, a young woman with a linen shawl pulled over her head against the sun's last heat, is Nefertiti, not the queen. The name was Carmen. Her husband is among the men coming down the path. She lifts a hand when she sees him, not waving exactly, just acknowledging, "I see you," and then turns back toward the house because there is still the evening bread to think about and the children to bring in and the oil lamp to fill for the night. The men pass through the gate into the village. The foreman follows last, and behind him the copper tools, carried now in a reed basket by one of the younger apprentices. They will be stored in the magazine, the storage room attached to the village scribe's house, until morning. Inside the gate, the street is shaded. The houses crowd close enough that the last sunlight only reaches the upper portions of the walls. Down at ground level, it is already dusk. A dog, one of several who seem to belong to no one in particular and everyone in general, gets up from the dust where it has been sleeping and moves aside without alarm to let the men pass. Somewhere further into the village, a child is crying, not with distress, just with the flat tiredness cry of a small child who has been awake too long. A woman's voice, low and steady, answering, and then another sound, the soft knock of pottery, the gentle percussion of someone doing something repetitive in a small room. You stand just inside the gate as the men disperse into their houses, ducking through the low doorways, disappearing into the warm interior dark. The sounds of the village shift. The voices of men are added to the voices that were already there. Women, children, the movement of daily life inside the walls. The sun touches the edge of the cliff above the western valley, and in the span of perhaps a minute, the golden light deepens to red, and then the red fades to purple, and then the purple begins to darken toward the blue of first evening, and the first lamp is lit. You can see it in a high window, a narrow gap in a wall that serves as both a window and a ventilation slot, a small warm flame, oil burning on a floating wick, and the pale yellow light it casts on the plastered wall beyond. Then another, and another. The village wakes into its night life, and the lamps are the small warm eyes of that waking. Chapter 3: The Village of el-Medina. You do not need to know everything about this place. You only need to walk through it, to be here, to breathe the air, which at this hour is cooling, not cold, not yet, but dropping towards something comfortable after the fierce, dry heat of the afternoon, and notice what you notice. The main street of el-Medina runs roughly north to south. It is paved, or rather surfaced, with packed earth and limestone chippings, the same limestone dust that coats everything in this valley. In places, someone has placed flat stones to step across a lower section where water, rainwater, when it comes, which is rare, might collect. The street is perhaps 2 meters wide. The houses press in on either side. Each house in the village follows a similar plan, though each one has been modified over the years by its inhabitants. A wall knocked through, a room added, a staircase rebuilt. The basic form is 4 rooms, arranged front to back like a sequence of boxes. The entrance room at the front is slightly raised, 3 or 4 steps up from the street, and it contains a low platform along one wall that functions as a household shrine. The household god in most of these houses is Bes. We will come to Bes in time. But for now, understand that the entrance room is a liminal space, neither fully private nor fully public, the place where the house presents itself to the world, where the family gods are displayed, where guests might sit. Behind the entrance room is the main living and working space, a larger room, higher ceilinged, with a staircase leading up to the roof at one end. This is where the women spend most of their working day, grinding grain, kneading dough, weaving if the household can afford a loom. The ceiling in this room is sometimes supported by a single wooden column. The walls are plastered mud, smoothed, and sometimes painted with simple designs, geometric borders in and blue, occasional larger scenes of flowers or birds. The floor is packed earth, sometimes covered with reed mats. The third room is the bedroom. It is behind the main room, smaller and darker. There is likely a raised sleeping platform along one wall, not a wooden bed, in a worker's household, though they exist in wealthier homes, but a plastered bench, wide enough for 2 people to sleep side by side, raised perhaps 40 centimeters off the floor to allow air to circulate beneath and to keep the sleeper away from ground-level insects and the occasional scorpion. On this platform, the family unrolls its linen sleeping mat each evening. A small oil lamp rests in a niche in the wall. Below the bedroom, accessible by a short stair or ladder through a hole in the floor, is the cellar. This is where grain and beer jars and dried foods are stored, where the temperature stays a few degrees cooler than the rooms above. Above everything else is the roof. The roof is the 5th room of the Egyptian house, and in summer it is perhaps the most important. It is flat, slightly raised at the edges to prevent things rolling off, with a low parapet. In the heat of high summer, and in this part of Egypt, summer nights can hold their heat well past midnight. Many families carry their sleeping mats up to the roof at night, unfurling them in the open air where any breeze from the river can reach them. Roof sleeping was not unusual. It was, in the right months, simply the most comfortable thing to do. But it is not high summer now. The flood season is ending, the air is cooling. Tonight the family will sleep inside. You move slowly through the street, not hurrying, letting your eyes adjust to the deepening dusk. The smells of the village at this hour are layered and specific. The first and most insistent smell is the bread. Flat bread, made from emmer wheat, ground and kneaded, and slapped onto the sides of a domed clay oven, a tabun, that is shared between several households in the courtyard at the north end of the village. The tabun has been burning since afternoon, and the bread smell that comes off it is warm and slightly smoky, a smell that would be recognizable in any culture in any century. Underneath it, onions sweating in oil, the bright sharp smell of garlic, the earthier smell of lentils beginning to soften. The other smell, beneath the food and the oil lamp smoke, is the specific smell of this place. Drying after the day's heat, the faint alkaline trace of the Nile in everything, the mud used to build the walls, the water carried up from the river in heavy clay jars, the ground itself. Egypt is the gift of the Nile, the ancient writer said. He meant the fertile black silt the Nile left behind with its annual flood. But he might equally have been describing this smell, this particular mineral vegetable watery smell that pervades the entire civilization, that is present in everything, that you would recognize if you could travel here as immediately and completely as you recognize the smell of rain on dry earth. A cat crosses the street ahead of you. Cats were not kept as pets in quite the modern sense in ancient Egypt. Or rather, they occupied a more functional and more sacred role simultaneously. They hunted rats and mice and snakes, particularly cobra, which made them enormously valuable near the grain stores. They were associated with the goddess Bastet. To harm a cat was a serious matter, but the cat crossing the street now is simply a cat, going about cat business, indifferent to you. You pause at the opening of a narrow side alley between two houses. From somewhere within, you can hear the sound of a woman singing, or not exactly singing, more like a rhythmic murmuring, a work song for someone doing a repetitive task in the dark. The rhythm is slow and unhurried. It continues for a few moments and then stops. Somewhere further along the street, two men are talking. Their voices are low, tired. You catch nothing of the words, only the rhythm of Egyptian conversation, a language related to the languages of the wider region, written in the hieratic script that scribes used for everyday documents, flowing and compact, and quite unlike the monumental hieroglyphics carved on temple walls. These men are speaking in the colloquial form of the language, and even if you could hear the words clearly, they would mean nothing to you. But the tone is familiar, the flat, comfortable conversational tone of two people who have spent a long day together and have nothing urgent to say to each other and are mildly enjoying that fact. A child appears in a doorway, perhaps 4 years old, perhaps 5, and stares at you with the absolute unself-consciousness of small children for a moment. Then a hand reaches out from inside the doorway and draws the child back, and the door, a low wooden frame with a wooden panel, simple but present, swings softly closed. The lamps in the windows multiply. The sky above the village, framed by the line of the rooftops on either side of the street, has deepened to a rich dark blue. The stars are beginning to appear. Not the full flood of stars you will see later, when the sky is fully dark, but the first arrivals, the brightest ones, pricking through the blue one by one. The village is settling, not sleeping yet. There is still the evening meal to prepare and eat, the children to manage, the minor social commerce of neighbors talking across low rooftop walls. But settling, slowing, moving toward the particular rhythm of an Egyptian evening, which has its own quality, its own texture. You walk to the end of the street and turn, and find a place to stand near the low wall of a courtyard where a tabun oven still radiates warmth. The heat of it comes to you in slow waves, friendly and dry. The bread smell is very strong here. You breathe it in. The first full dark is coming. Chapter 4: Bread and Beer. The evening meal at el-Medina was not elaborate, but it was sufficient, and sufficient in the context of a paid state worker in New Kingdom. Egypt meant something more reliable than many of the world's people at this time would have had. The grain rations that came each month were the foundation of everything. Emmer wheat, a hulled wheat, not the modern bread wheat you might be familiar with, but older, more labor-intensive to process, with a nuttier flavor and a denser texture, was ground by hand on a saddle quern, a large flat stone with a smaller round stone that you push back and forth across the grain until it becomes flour. This was women's work in most Egyptian households, and it was hard work. The constant forward lean of the grinding posture left its mark on women's skeletons in the archaeological record. Flattened discs in the spine, worn joints in the knees and wrists. The flour was mixed with water and a little salt, and left to prove with a sourdough starter, a ball of old dough kept specifically for this purpose, and then formed into rounds and baked in or against the tabun. The resulting flatbread was dense and slightly chewy, with a mild sour note from the fermentation. It was the core of every meal. Around the bread, the other foods arranged themselves. Onions, red and white both, and possibly a form of what we would recognize as shallots, were eaten raw, cooked in fat, roasted, pickled. They were cheap, filling, and found in enormous quantities in the archaeological record. So was garlic. The Roman writer Pliny would later claim, centuries after this date, that the workers who built the earlier pyramids, in Old Kingdom times, a full 1,000 years before our story, ate quantities of onions and garlic and radishes, and historians have found no reason to disbelieve him on that general point, though his specific numbers were probably invented. Dried fish, caught in the Nile and dried in the sun, were another regular element of the workers' diet at el-Medina. The papyri that record the ration distributions at the village mention fish alongside grain. This was not fine dining. Dried Nile fish, salted and pressed and dried again, had a strong flavor and a particular smell that you would recognize from a distance. But it was a reliable source of protein. And then there was beer. Beer was the universal drink of ancient Egypt. Across all classes, from the laborers who dug irrigation channels to the households of the wealthy, from the workers of el-Medina to the priests of Karnak, beer was present at every meal, offered to the gods at every temple ritual, listed in every ration document. Beer as the Egyptians made, it was not quite like modern beer. It was thick, low in alcohol relative to modern brews, more like a liquid bread than a drink in the modern sense, nutritious, calorie-dense, slightly fermented, made from the same emmer wheat and spelt that provided the household bread. It was drunk through a reed straw or a pierced stick to filter out the grain chaff that floated on the surface. At el-Medina, women brewed the beer at home. The process took several days, soaking the grain, sprouting it to begin the conversion of starches, drying and crushing it, mixing with water and unfermented bread, fermenting in large pottery jars. Men were officially allowed time off work to oversee this process. The ostraca, those pottery shard notepads that recorded everything, mention men absent from work with the explanation brewing beer. Some of them, the records suggest with the quiet irony of a bureaucracy that has seen everything, were perhaps absent more often than was strictly necessary for the brewing. You are sitting, or imagining sitting, in the main room of a house near the center of the village. It is not a particular house. It is a composite of many houses assembled from what archaeology and papyrus have told us. The room is warm. The lamp in the wall niche is lit, a shallow clay dish, perhaps the size of your open palm, with a wick of twisted linen floating in a small pool of castor oil. The light it produces is not bright. It does not flood the room. It creates a pool of amber warmth roughly the size of the table it is placed near, and beyond that pool the room recedes into deep shadow. The far corner of the room, where the staircase leads up to the roof, is in near darkness. The family has arranged itself around the low table, or rather the low stone shelf that serves as a table in the typical Egyptian domestic posture, seated on the floor or on low stools or on the edge of the sleeping platform. There are a woman, a man, and 2 children. The children are old enough to sit still, perhaps 6 and 9 years old, perhaps older. The younger child holds a piece of bread in both hands and eats with complete attention. The older child is looking at the lamp flame. The man says something. The woman answers. The older child says something, and the man makes a sound that might be agreement or might be mild correction. It is impossible to tell in the low lamplight. Outside, through the narrow window high in the wall, the village sounds continue. A voice, a dog, the distant percussion of something being moved in another house. The beer is in a clay jar, stopped with a clay plug and a wad of papyrus fiber. The woman unplugs it and pours a portion for her husband into a clay cup and another for herself, and sets the jar back carefully. Beer did not keep indefinitely. This jar was probably freshly made within the last few days. Dates are on the low shelf too, dried, a little sticky, and some dried figs, wrinkled and intensely sweet. Onions, sliced raw, garlic perhaps. This is the shape of an evening meal at el-Medina, and it has been the shape of this meal for every night that anyone in this family can remember, and for the nights of everyone who lived in this house before them. Later in the month, if the ration delivery has been good, there might be meat, not often, but occasionally. The ostraca mention beef and goat. On feast days associated with certain gods, and there were many such days in the Egyptian religious calendar, something close to 90 feast days in a year of 365, the workers might receive additional rations including wine. But tonight, bread and beer and the sweetness of dates, and the lamp burning low in the wall niche, and the children's voices beginning to slow and thicken as the hour grows later. The man finishes his beer. He sets down the cup. He leans back slightly against the wall and closes his eyes for a moment, not sleeping, just resting, feeling the tiredness settle into his body now that the day's work is acknowledged as finished. His wife watches him with the practical, affectionate attention of someone who has watched this same man put down the same cup at the end of the same kind of day many times before. The lamp flickers. Something in the night outside a door, a footstep passes and is gone. The children are taken to the back room. There are voices, briefly the negotiation of sleep, the particular parental sound of bedtime authority being gently deployed, and then quiet. The man and woman sit together in the lamplight in the main room for a while longer, not talking now, just sitting. The lamp makes its small, steady light. Outside, the village is quieter than it was. The frogs from the direction of the Nile have begun their evening chorus, a sound so continuous and so regular that it has become the background of the night. The way traffic hum is the background of a modern city, noticed only when it briefly pauses. The fire in the tabun oven outside has burned to coals. The bread smell is fading now. The night is fully here. Chapter 5. The Scribe's House. Not all homes in Thebes were like the worker's house at el-Medina. Not all evenings in this Egypt were the same. Move now, gently, without effort, as if carried across the Nile. Not crossing the river physically, just shifting your attention. The river is perhaps 3 kilometers away from el-Medina, and to reach the eastern bank you would take a ferry, a flat papyrus reed boat, poled across the current in the dark, and arrive in the area of the great city of Thebes. Thebes in the New Kingdom was one of the largest and most important cities in the world. Its temples stretched for kilometers along the eastern bank of the Nile. Karnak was the greatest of them, a complex of such immense scale that its central hypostyle hall, the Hall of Columns, begun under Seti I and elaborated by II, it contained 134 columns, some of them 23 meters tall, covered in painted relief carvings from floor to capital. It is difficult to imagine the scale of this place. The columns in the central nave of the hall were wide enough that 5 people could not link hands around one. But we are not in the temple tonight, not yet. We are in a street behind the temple precincts, in the merchant and administrative quarter of the city, where the houses are better built, wider, with more rooms and a different quality of furniture. Here lives a household scribe, a man who works as a record keeper and document writer for the temple administration, one of the educated class whose literacy is their primary occupation and status marker. He earns more than the tomb workers, though not enormously more. His house has 5 rooms on the ground floor and a proper walled garden at the back, where a small fig tree and some herbs grow. The difference you notice immediately is the light. This house has more lamps. Not more light, exactly. No lamp in ancient Egypt produces what we would call a bright room, but more lamps, more distributed. There is one in the entrance hall, one on a carved stone shelf in the main room, one in the corner beside the cedarwood chest where the household's linen is stored. The lamps here are not plain clay dishes. Several of them are alabaster, that translucent white stone that was from deposits in the eastern desert, and the alabaster creates a softer, more diffused light than the opaque clay, glowing faintly around its edges where the stone is thin. The scribe himself sits at a low writing table in the room that serves as his study. He is writing or reading, it is difficult to say from the doorway. Before him on the table are several sheets of papyrus, held flat by small stone weights. The papyrus is written in hieratic script, that flowing cursive form of the Egyptian language that scribes used for everything except formal or religious inscriptions. His writing implement is a reed brush, actually more like a very small brush than a pen, and the ink is carbon black, mixed in a small palette with 2 wells, one for black and one for the reddish that was used for headings and important names. The scribe is a man of perhaps 40. He is lean, as most Egyptians in this period seem to have been from the evidence of wall paintings. The reliably abundant Egyptian diet was not the diet of sedentary excess, and his work involves sitting, but also standing, walking, the constant physical engagement with the world that was unavoidable before mechanization. He has shaved his head, not a religious requirement for him, as it would be for a priest, but a common practical choice in the Egyptian heat, and one associated with cleanliness and propriety. His linen kilt is white, or as close to white as linen gets with regular washing. He is barefoot, as he would be in the house. His wife is in the adjoining room, which serves as both the women's working space and the children's sleeping room. She is doing something with her hair, combing it, or braiding it, working a comb of carved bone through the black length of it. Her hair is long, as was standard for Egyptian women of her class, and she has maintained it with oil, castor oil again, the utility ingredient of the Egyptian household, used in lamps and hair and skin, and perhaps with coal, which was used both around the eyes and sometimes worked into the hair at the temples. The smell of this oil and coal combination, slightly warm, slightly mineral, faintly floral if the oil has had dried flower petals steeped in it, is the specific smell of a well-maintained woman's room in a prosperous Egyptian house. The children are already asleep. There are two of them, a girl of perhaps 7 and a younger boy, perhaps 3. They sleep on a raised platform along the back wall, covered with a linen sheet despite the warmth of the evening. The platform has been smoothed with plaster and laid over with a woven reed mat. Each child's head rests on a headrest carved from a single piece of wood, curved in a shape that supports the neck and holds the head just slightly raised above the sleeping surface. The headrest was the standard Egyptian sleeping implement across all classes. It was not simply practical, or rather, it was practical, because lying with your neck supported that way does allow air to circulate beneath the head and keeps it away from the ground where insects and scorpions might be active. But it was also powerfully symbolic. The headrest was associated with protection during sleep, with the vulnerable hours of night when the soul, the ba, was believed to leave the sleeping body and travel. Some headrests were carved from ivory or fine wood and inscribed with protective spells. Some bore the image of Bes, that same protective household deity we will meet properly in the next chapter. In wealthy households, headrests were sometimes gilded. Tomb, a later example, but not wildly different in era from our setting, contained multiple carved and gilded headrests of extraordinary quality. The children's headrests in this house are plain carved wood, smooth and worn from use. The girl has used hers long enough that her hair has left a faint shine on the curved surface, where oil and skin have worked their polish over years. You stand in the doorway between the two rooms, the scribe at his papyrus, the children asleep on their platform, the wife at her careful hairwork, and the lamplight makes the scene into something that has the quality of an old painting, not in the modern sense of painting, but in the Egyptian sense, warm and black and the gold of lamplight, the figures still and purposeful, everything in its place. The scribe sets down his reed brush. He rolls one of the papyrus sheets carefully and inserts it into a cylindrical case of worked leather. He does this slowly, with the attention of a man who respects the objects of his work. Papyrus was not cheap. It was made from the pith of the papyrus plant that grew in the Nile Delta, processed in long labor-intensive sheets and joined into scrolls. Writing materials were expensive. A scribe treated his papyrus with care. He sits for a moment in the lamp quiet, thinking about something. Then he rises and goes to the doorway of his wife's room and speaks to her quietly. She responds without looking up from her hair. He makes a soft sound of acknowledgement and turns back to his study. Outside in the street, a voice calls once, wordlessly, perhaps a neighbor, perhaps a night watchman, and then is silent. The frogs are very loud tonight, a chorus rising from the direction of the Nile, constant and rhythmic and oddly comforting in its constancy. The scribe adjusts the oil lamp on its shelf, adds a small amount of oil from a clay flask beside it, and watches the flame settle back to its steady height. He regards the flame for a moment. Then he goes to his own sleeping mat, rolls himself into his linen sheet, and lays his head on his headrest. The lamp burns on. Across the city, unseen from here, but always present as a fact of the night, the great temple of Karnak begins its evening work. Chapter 6. Bes at the Threshold. In every bedroom in el-Medina, in the worker's house, and in the scribe's house, and in the foreman's slightly larger house near the village gate, there is an image of Bes. He is not what you might expect a god to look like. He is short. The ancient Egyptians depicted him as a dwarf, a stocky figure who barely reaches the waist of the other gods when shown alongside them. His face is leonine, a broad, flat face, wide nostrils, the mane of a lion falling around it, and his tongue is always out, protruding in a gesture that in any other context you might read as impish or comic. But Bes is not comic. He is fierce. He carries a sword sometimes, or a rattle, or a snake. His eyes are wide and round and do not blink. His expression is the expression of absolute vigilance. He stands between you and what threatens you in the night. In the houses of el-Medina, Bes was painted or carved on the walls and doorposts of the bedroom, specifically, most often, above the doorway into the sleeping room. He was placed there to watch over the room in the hours when the family was at its most vulnerable. Asleep, unconscious, their barque free to roam, their bodies unguarded. Archaeological excavations of the village have found Bes images in almost every house, in painted plaster, in carved limestone, in small pottery figurines placed in wall niches. The Bes figurines are sometimes worn smooth from touching. People reached out to them as they passed, as you might reach out to a familiar doorpost. He was above all the protector of sleep and of children. The time of sleep was the most dangerous time, not simply from the practical dangers of the night, scorpions and snakes, and the occasional intruder, but from the spiritual ones, the evil spirits and malevolent entities that moved more freely in the darkness when protective rituals were interrupted and the gods of day were absent. Nightmares were not simply bad dreams. They were the evidence of malicious visitation. A child who woke screaming in the night had been visited by something that Bes was supposed to repel. Women in labor also called on Bes, and this is reflected in the archaeological evidence. Bes figurines are found in particular concentration in birth rooms, alongside the smaller figures of the hippopotamus goddess of childbirth, with her heavy pregnant belly and her crocodile tail. The two of them, Bes fierce and watchful at the doorway, large and protective at the bedside, formed a kind of household pantheon of protection for the most vulnerable moments of life, birth, sleep, and the passage between them. But Bes also governed the content of the night, not just whether you slept safely, but what you dreamed. Dreams in ancient Egypt were not incidental or meaningless. They were communications. They came from the gods, from the ancestors, from the wandering soul encountering things in the landscape of the night that the waking mind could not access. To dream of something or to dream of it in a particular way was to receive information. This was not a fringe belief or an elite intellectual position. It was simply the way things were understood to work, from the highest levels of the palace to the humblest worker's household. A specific document survives that shows us the shape of this belief in extraordinary detail. It is known today as the Chester Papyrus III, named for the collector Alfred Chester, who acquired it in the early 20th century, and it is now housed in the British Museum in London. It was written around 1300 BCE, which places it precisely in the period of our story. It is a dream manual, a comprehensive handbook for the interpretation of dreams, listing what it means to see yourself in various scenarios in a dream and what each scenario portends for your waking life. The list is lengthy and sometimes surprising. To see yourself dead in a dream was a good sign. It meant long life was coming. To drink warm beer meant you would suffer some kind of trial or difficulty. To see your face in a mirror meant you would take a new wife. To eat crocodile meat meant success over your enemies. To see yourself looking out of a window meant your prayers would be heard by the gods. The dream manual was probably kept by scribes and dream interpreters who were consulted when a dream seemed particularly vivid or troubling. But the general awareness of dream meanings probably filtered into every household, the way folk knowledge of signs and omens always does. A child wakes from a bad dream and calls out. The mother comes. She carries the small oil lamp from the shelf in the sleeping room, its warm light filling the space, and she speaks to the child in the low, particular voice of a parent managing night terrors, firm but gentle, authoritative but kind. She checks beneath the sleeping platform for the small pottery figures that are supposed to be there, placed there specifically for the child's protection. A Bess figure, a small faience amulet in the shape of an eye, the eye of Horus, a universally potent protective symbol, and perhaps a small stone bead amulet on a cord tied to the wooden post of the sleeping platform. These things are all in order. She pats the child and speaks again, and the child's breathing steadies. She stays until the breathing becomes deep and regular. Then she sets the lamp back in its niche and returns to her own sleeping mat. Bess watches from above the doorway. His tongue is out. His eyes are open. He is not sleeping and he is not leaving. The hours pass. In the entrance room at the front of the house, the household shrine is still. On a small painted shelf, figures of Bess and perhaps Hathor, the cow-eared goddess of love and beauty and joy, another household presence, are arranged in their permanent vigil. Offerings were placed here at certain times, flowers, a small amount of grain or oil, and prayers were spoken. This was not the formal religion of the great temples. It was domestic religion, intimate, practical, concerned with the immediate needs of the household rather than the cosmic narrative of the gods. Though the cosmic narrative of the gods was never very far away, you can feel it in the air of the village even now. In the darkness, in the hour priests tracking the stars from the temple roof kilometers away, in the belief that underneath this very night, underneath the ground on which the houses stand, beneath the desert that starts at the western edge of the village, something enormous and sacred is happening. The sun is traveling through the underworld, but we will come to that. For now, the house is quiet. The lamp in the bedroom niche makes its small, steady flame, and Bess watches over the sleeping family. and the frogs sing their continuous song from the direction of the Nile, and the night deepens. In chapter 7, the temple at night, first watch. The priests of Karnak were not sleeping tonight. They were not sleeping any night, not completely, or rather, they slept in shifts, because the ritual service of the great temple was continuous. The god Amun, king of the gods in the New Kingdom's theological hierarchy, a deity of incomprehensible power and abstraction whose name means something like the Hidden One, did not stop being a god when the sun went down. His rituals did not pause. His temple did not close. The daily ritual at the temple of Amun-Re at Karnak followed a structure that has been partly reconstructed by Egyptologists from the texts that survive on temple walls, from papyrus documents, and from the parallel evidence at other temples. 3 main ritual sessions: morning, midday, and evening. Each one involved entering the innermost sanctuary, where the cult statue of the god was housed in a carved wooden shrine, and performing a sequence of actions: unsealing the shrine, awakening the god with a specific chant, purifying the statue, clothing it, offering it food and drink, performing hymns, and finally resealing the shrine until the next ritual. But the night was not simply the gap between rituals. The night had its own liturgy. The priest who enters the innermost sanctuary now, his white linen robe freshly washed, his head freshly shaved, his sandals of papyrus fiber removed at the sanctuary threshold, is one of the hour priests. He has bathed twice today already. He will bathe twice in the night also. Ritual purity, which included bodily cleanliness, abstinence from certain foods, sexual abstinence during periods of service, was not a metaphor in the Egyptian temple. It was a physical requirement, as concrete as the linen robe. He carries a small oil lamp. In the deep interior of the temple, past the outer halls with their forest of columns, past the transverse hall with its granite altars, into the inner sanctuaries where the air is still and dense and smells very strongly of something specific. That is the word comes from the Egyptian, and it is a compound incense, not a single substance, but a mixture of many ingredients, blended together according to a precise recipe, and formed into small pellets or cakes that are placed on hot coals in a clay censer and allowed to smolder. Smell of is complex, sweet at first, the honey and wine in the recipe, and the dried raisins, and then resinous, the pine resin and myrrh and juniper berries beginning to come through, and underneath that something earthy and almost medicinal, the galangale and sweet flag and myrrh together, and finally something you can't quite identify, a note that isn't quite floral and isn't quite spicy and isn't quite woody but is somehow all of them, smoothed and unified by the honey and wine that serve as the binding medium. 3 separate recipes are preserved. They were carved in stone on the walls of the Temple of, and the Temple of, both built considerably later than our period, but drawing on ritual traditions that were ancient even to them. Plutarch, the Greek writer who recorded so much of what he knew about Egypt for later scholars, described a 16-ingredient version in his philosophical essay Isis and Osiris, written at the end of the 1st century of the Common Era, but referring to traditions with deep roots. The ingredients included honey and wine and dried raisins as the binding base, then resinous materials, pine resin, myrrh, frankincense, and juniper berries, then roots and aromatics, galangale, sweet flag, orris root, cardamom, and potentially others. The mixture was prepared in stages over several days, the ingredients added at specific moments, the process guided by readings from ritual texts. It was not simply a recipe, it was a ritual act. And it was burned specifically in the evening. The daily incense schedule at Egyptian temples was frankincense in the morning, myrrh at midday, and at evening, each matched to a part of the daily solar cycle, each offering something different to the god and to the temple's spiritual climate. Was the night incense. It was believed to bring restful sleep with vivid dreams. It restored balance after the disruption of the day. It invited the kind of calm, receptive consciousness in which the gods might speak through visions. The priest places fresh pellets on the brazier in the inner sanctuary. The coals are already glowing. Another priest has been here within the hour, and the new pellets begin to smolder almost immediately. The smoke rises in a thin, pale column toward the ceiling, which is painted with stars on a dark blue ground, the image of the night sky above the most sacred interior space. He speaks. You cannot hear the words exactly. They are in the hieratic script language that was the spoken form of Egyptian in this period. But their rhythm is clear and formal, the particular rhythm of ritual speech. Measured, cadenced, each phrase a complete thing in itself, separated from the next by a brief silence that the echoing stone fills with its own continuation. He is addressing the statue of Amun, which stands in its wooden shrine, the shrine doors open before him. He is telling the god that night has come, that the correct rituals have been performed, that the world is in order. The daily temple ritual was not, in the Egyptian understanding, merely symbolic or devotional. It was operative. It was doing something real. The priests were not simply expressing religious feeling. They were maintaining cosmic order, Ma'at, the fundamental Egyptian concept that encompassed truth, justice, balance, and the proper functioning of everything. If the rituals were not performed correctly, Ma'at was disrupted. The sun might not rise, the Nile might not flood, the world might slip into chaos. This sounds, from our modern vantage, like magical thinking, but consider the consistency and care with which these rituals were maintained across centuries, the extraordinary effort and discipline of a civilization organized in significant part around the idea that the daily performance of proper action was the thing that kept the world running. It is not so far from other kinds of human effort to maintain order, to perform the necessary acts so that the expected outcomes continue. The priest completes the first portion of the evening ritual. He closes the shrine doors carefully. This is its own ritual act, closing the god back into darkness and privacy for the night hours. He backs out of the sanctuary, sweeping the floor behind him to remove his own footprints, as protocol requires. He carries his lamp out through the transverse hall, out through the hypostyle hall with its enormous columns, out through the second pylon into the open air of the temple forecourt. Above him, the sky. The temple at this hour, the outer courtyards open to the night sky, the colonnades dark. The sound of the city, muffled by the thick temple walls, has a particular stillness, not silence. From outside the walls, you can hear the city, and from the direction of the Nile, there is always the frog chorus. But inside the walls, the sound is absorbed, quieter than outside, more present with its own sounds, his own footsteps, the small sound of the lamp flame moving in the light night breeze, the distant chanting of another priest in one of the subsidiary chapels. He climbs the stair that leads up to the pylon roof. He is going to check the water clock. Chapter 8: The Water Clock and the Hours of Night. On the roof of the first pylon, sheltered in a small stone-floored enclosure from the worst of the wind, stands the clepsydra, water clock, from the Greek water thief. The Egyptians had their own name for it. The object itself is remarkable, a vessel of alabaster beautifully worked in the shape of a truncated cone, wider at the top than at the bottom. In its base there is a small hole, and through this hole water drips out at a steady rate, the level in the vessel falling hour by hour through the night. The oldest surviving water clock, the clepsydra of Karnak, dates to the reign of III, who ruled roughly a century before our story, and it is now in the Cairo Museum. It is made of alabaster. On its interior surface, 12 vertical columns of markings are inscribed, one column for each month of the Egyptian year. Each column is divided into 12 marks, one for each of the 12 hours of the night. The reason for 12 columns, rather than a single set of markings, is this: the Egyptian hour was not fixed in length. The day was divided into 12 hours and the night into 12 hours, but those hours expanded and contracted with the seasons. In winter, when the night is long, each of the 12 hours of darkness is actually longer than a summer night hour. The hour priest, consulting the clepsydra in December, must use the correct winter column to read the right hour. The same water level that indicates the 4th hour in January might indicate only the 3rd hour in June, or the 5th in winter. This seasonal flexibility in the definition of an hour was not unique to Egypt. It was the standard system throughout the ancient world, which consistently divided daylight into 12 and nighttime into 12, regardless of the actual length of each. But the physical artifact of the clepsydra at Karnak shows us exactly how the Egyptians handled the practical reality of it. The priest on the roof fills the vessel from a clay jar kept for this purpose. The water is cool from the night air. He fills it to the brim, checks the position of the drainage hole, ensures it is unobstructed, and settles himself on a stone bench nearby to begin the watch. While he watches, he also looks up. The stars are extraordinary tonight. There is no moon, or the moon has set early, and the sky above Thebes on a clear night in the New Kingdom was a sky with no competition. No torches higher than the temple pylons, no lamps on the water. The city of Thebes had its own modest illumination, the small scattered lights of household lamps and temple torches, but these made no impression on the sky above. The Milky Way is visible, brilliantly visible, as a dense, slightly irregular band of light stretching from roughly south to north overhead, dense enough in some sections to cast a faint shadow. The Egyptians knew this as the body of Nut. We have already placed Nut in our story without explaining her fully. Now on the temple roof, under her starred body, is the place to do that. Nut was one of the most ancient and most fundamental of the Egyptian deities. She was the sky, not the sky as a color or a weather system, but the sky as a living body, a great feminine presence arched overhead. She was depicted in paintings and on coffin lids as a woman arched above the earth, her hands and feet touching the 4 cardinal points of the horizon, her body spangled with stars. She was one of the original gods, born from the first emergence of form from chaos. Every evening, Nut swallowed the sun. This was not a hostile act. It was the necessary process of renewal. The sun, Ra, the solar deity in his daytime form, entered her mouth at the western horizon and traveled through her body during the night hours, moving through the darkness of her divine interior, being reconstituted and renewed. And every morning, Nut gave birth to the sun again from between her thighs at the eastern horizon. The birth was depicted on coffin lids, on tomb walls, as a literal emergence. The sun disk rising from the lower edge of Nut's outstretched body, attended by figures of birth. The priest on the temple roof knows all of this not as theology, but as lived reality. He is sitting inside the body of Nut. Her stars are above and around him. The stars he uses to count the hours, the Deccan stars, the 36 star groups that the Egyptians tracked as a second timekeeping system, are the markings on her body. The Deccan system was one of the extraordinary achievements of Egyptian astronomical observation. 36 star groups were identified, each rising in succession on the eastern horizon over the course of the year. Each Deccan rose about 40 minutes after the one before it. In the nighttime sky, at any given hour, several Deccans were rising and setting, and a trained observer could tell the time roughly by knowing which Deccan was on the horizon. The star we call Sirius was one of the most important of the Egyptian star markers. To the Egyptians, later identified by the Greeks with the goddess Isis. It rose just before dawn in late summer, immediately preceding the annual inundation of the Nile. Its reappearance after 70 days of invisibility below the horizon was the marker of the new year, the signal that the flood was coming. When the priest sees approaching the eastern horizon in the hours before dawn, he knows the year is nearly ready to turn. But tonight, in the middle of the night, other stars are being watched. The priest's log, a clay tablet on which he will record the hour of each observation, shows his marks accumulating through the watches of the night. The water clock drips. The level falls. By the third mark of the winter column, it is the third hour of the night. He stamps his feet gently against the stone to keep the circulation moving. The night air at this elevation, on the open roof, has a bite to it. Not cold by the standards of northern climates, this is Upper Egypt, and the temperature rarely drops below what a northern European would call mild. But the desert loses its heat quickly after dark, and the stone of the pylon roof is cold beneath his feet. Below him the city sleeps, or most of it does. He can see, if he looks to the south, the faint glow of another temple, the Temple of Luxor, a kilometer away along the Nile bank, connected to Karnak by the long avenue of sphinxes that was built to process the gods between the two sanctuaries during great festivals. A torch somewhere in that temple's precincts is burning in the dark. To the west, across the Nile, the desert hills are dark shapes against the stars. Somewhere in those hills, carved into the rock, are the tombs, the Valley of the Kings, the royal dead in their painted chambers, surrounded by the texts that described their journey through this very night, the same night the priest is watching from above. It is a strange thought, and he does not dwell on it. The water clock drips. Chapter 9: Ra's Night Journey. This is the part of the night that the Egyptians took most seriously, not the dangers of the physical darkness, the snakes and the thieves and the accidents that can happen in the dark. Those were real and manageable, the things that Bess and practical caution could address. But the larger darkness, the darkness underneath the world, where the entire cosmic machinery of existence was playing out. That was what the ritual and the watching and the incense and the water clock were all in service of. The is a text. Its full title translates roughly as What is in the Underworld, or the Book of the Hidden Chamber. It was written on the walls of royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. The tomb of III is one of the earliest complete examples, and the text recurs through the 19th dynasty tombs of the era we are inhabiting. It describes, in 12 sections corresponding to the 12 hours of the night, the journey of the solar barque through the underworld, from sunset to sunrise. The description is not symbolic in a vague or poetic sense. It is specific. It names the gates. It names the guardians. It describes what the barque carries, who rows it, what resistances it faces at each gate, and what must be said to pass through. In the first hour, Ra's barque enters the western horizon, the place the Egyptians called the horizon where the sky met the earth. The boat has an escort, a retinue of guards who accompany the sun through the darkness, each with their own function, their own role in protecting the journey. The second, third, and fourth hours bring the barque through increasingly deep and strange regions of the underworld. The creatures here are unlike the gods of the living world. They are serpent forms, hybrid figures, entities whose job is to maintain the passage of the sun against the forces that would disrupt it. The heat of the sun god nourishes the souls of the dead who live in these regions, and when Ra's light passes through them, they briefly experience it, a few moments of warmth in their otherwise dark existence, before the barque moves on and the darkness closes behind it. In the fifth hour, the barque passes through a region of exceptional strangeness, a subterranean cavern in which the god of the dead and of the necropolis rests on a sandy mound. This is the deepest point, the most removed from the living world. And then in the sixth hour, or according to some versions of the text, at the junction between the sixth and seventh hours, the precise middle of the night, something extraordinary happens. Ra merges with Osiris. These are two of the most important gods in the Egyptian pantheon, and in some sense they are opposites. Ra is the living sun, the principle of active solar energy, the force of day and motion and generation. Osiris is the dead king, the lord of the underworld, the principle of fertility that comes from death and decay, the flooded Nile depositing its silt, the grain dying in the ground before rising again. Ra lives, Osiris rules the dead, but in the middle of the night they meet. The depictions in the royal tombs show this as a literal fusion, a single figure with the head of a ram, Ra's nocturnal form, and the wrapping of a mummy, Osiris's characteristic appearance, surrounded by figures of protective gods. The hieroglyphic inscription nearby has been translated as it is Osiris who rests while Ra goes on, but also as something closer to a merger, a temporary identity. Ra is Osiris, Osiris is Ra in this single hour. This is the most sacred moment of the night, not dawn, which is merely the visible result of this hidden event, not the brilliant noon, which is the height of Ra's daytime glory. This, the dark merger, the invisible fusion at the center of the underworld, in the sixth or seventh hour, this is the hinge on which the entire cosmos turns. The hour priest on the temple roof knows approximately when this hour is. He watches for it with the water clock and the Deccan stars. He cannot see it. It is happening under the world in the realm of the dead, but he knows it is happening because the world continues. The sun rises every morning. That is all the evidence anyone needs. After the 6th hour, the barque begins its return journey. The atmosphere in the underworld texts changes. There is still resistance. There are still the gate guardians and the hostile forces, but the direction of travel has reversed. The sun is moving toward dawn now. In the 8th, 9th, and 10th hours, various judgment scenes and dispensations of justice occur. The Book of Gates, the companion funerary text that emphasizes the moral dimension of the afterlife, is especially vivid here. The blessed dead are ushered into regions of light and plenty, while the damned are cast into a lake of fire. In the 11th hour, the solar barque approaches the eastern horizon. The birth goddess Nut waits. In the 12th hour, the transformation is complete. The sun has passed through the body of the night, has merged with the dead king at its center, and has been remade. It emerges from between Nut's thighs as the morning sun, new, renewed, beginning its day journey again, every morning. This has happened every morning that has ever been, and will continue every morning that will ever be, as long as the rituals are performed and the order of things Mat is maintained. You lie in the dark on your sleeping mat or your raised platform, and overhead, behind the ceiling, behind the roof, behind the stars, this is happening. The boat is moving through the dark. The god is traveling. The world is being rebuilt. It is a remarkably comforting thought when you hold it correctly. The night is not empty. The night is full. The most important things are happening in it. Breathes. Chapter 10. The Roof at Midnight. Summer would have brought you up here. In the deep heat of June and July and August, the nights in Upper Egypt hold their warmth well past midnight. The walls that absorb the day's heat release it slowly through the evening hours, and by 10 or 11 at night, the interior of a small house can still be uncomfortably warm. On the roof, there is at least the possibility of a breeze off the river, but it is not summer. It is the season the Egyptians called the inundation season, when the Nile flood is receding and the silt is being left behind. The air tonight is fine, cool enough for comfort, not so cold that a single linen sheet is insufficient. The scribe's family is on the roof tonight, but only because the night is clear and he enjoys the stars. This is one of those imprecisely attested facts of ancient life. We know families slept on rooftops. We know it was common practice in warm weather, but the specific emotional content of that practice, the pleasure of it, the deliberate choice to be outside under the sky, we fill in from what we know about human beings and warm, clear nights. The mat is spread. The linen is thin, adequate for the temperature, no more. The scribe's wife has arranged the children on one side, the girl and boy nested together under the sheet, their small headrests aligned. She has positioned herself between the children and the low parapet at the roof edge, the protective instinct of a parent that needs no documentation. The scribe lies on his back. He is looking at the sky. The sky above Thebes on this clear night is almost incomprehensibly full of stars. The Milky Way, the body of Nut, which we have already spoken of, crosses the sky from roughly south to north, tilted at the angle of the Earth's rotation, and it is not a thin band of haze, but a complex, layered structure. Bright regions and dark regions, dense areas and open areas, the full three-dimensional depth of the galaxy visible in the dark zone between the stars. There is no equivalent to this in most places where modern people live. Light pollution has effectively ended the ancient human relationship with the fully dark sky, and you have to go to exceptional places, high desert, deep ocean, the farthest reaches of rural darkness, to see anything approaching what the scribe sees as his ordinary night sky. He knows these stars. Not formally, perhaps. He is not an hour priest, not a professional observer, but he knows them the way anyone who has slept outside regularly knows the sky. He knows where certain stars rise and where they set. He knows the ones that mark the seasons. He knows the ones his father pointed out to him when he was a child. Orion is up. Not Orion exactly. The Egyptians understood this constellation differently. They called it Sa, and they associated it with Osiris. The distinctive pattern of three bright stars that we call Orion's belt was visible in the Egyptian sky as part of the image of Sa, a figure striding across the sky in a specific posture that the ancient star maps depict on coffin lids and tomb ceilings. When the scribe looks at the stars of what we call Orion, he sees the figure of Osiris in the sky, arms raised, moving through the body of Nut. And moving ahead of Osiris Sa, already below the horizon this time of year, or just rising in the late night hours, is the star we call Sirius, the brightest fixed star in the sky. Was the faithful companion of Osiris in the sky story, Isis, Osiris's wife and protector, keeping him company in his heavenly form. The astronomical significance of Sirius, its role as the marker of the new year, its connection to the Nile flood, made it one of the most important stars in Egyptian sky watching. Its heliacal rising, just before dawn in late summer, was a signal that the flood was coming, that the year was beginning again, that the cycle of renewal was on schedule. The ceiling of the tomb of Seti I in the Valley of the Kings, carved out of the limestone a few kilometers west of where the scribe now lies looking at the sky, contains one of the finest astronomical ceilings ever painted in antiquity. The northern half of the sky is depicted with figures we can partly identify. The bull's foreleg, which is what the Egyptians called what we know as Major, the Great Bear, the 7 bright stars in the shape of a plow or a bear's body, a hippopotamus figure, a crocodile, various divine beings mapped onto the star patterns. It is a map of the sky as experienced and understood by Egyptians in this period, which is also to say, a map of a symbolic world overlaid on a physical one, the figures of myth made permanent in stone and paint above the bodies of the dead. The scribe does not lie on his roof, thinking about the astronomy of temple ceilings. He is simply lying on his roof looking at stars, as human beings have done on warm, clear nights on every continent where human beings have existed. The stars do not explain themselves. They do not need to be explained right now. They are simply there, numerous beyond counting, ancient beyond any measure he has available to him. His wife turns over beside him. One of the children makes a small sound, not quite a word, and then is still. The frogs from the Nile are loud tonight. They have been building since the early evening, and now, in the middle of the night, they form a continuous chorus, not a single sound, but a texture, layers of frog voices from reeds and mud banks all along the nearest reach of the river, a sound as old as amphibians and as constant as the water they live beside. Other sounds enter the frog texture. A night bird somewhere, An ibis, probably the sacred ibis that nested along the Nile banks and was associated with Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing and the measurement of time, depicted always with the long curved bill that is one of the distinctive marks of the ibis in flight. The ibis is moving somewhere, making a low and slightly plaintive sound once, and then again from a different direction. Further away, much further away, from the direction of the desert edge to the west, a jackal. A single short call, then another, then silence. The scribe hears the jackal without alarm, though he is aware of it. Jackals were common in the desert margins, in the rubbish middens at the edge of the city, in the necropolis areas where the dead were buried. They were not threatening to a human being in most encounters, but they were associated immediately, viscerally, in every Egyptian mind, with Anubis, the god of the dead and embalming, the guide of souls to the underworld. Anubis was depicted as a man with a jackal's head, or as a jackal lying on a chest, watchful and sleek. The sound of a real jackal in the dark, near the cemetery, had a precise meaning in this culture, even if it was not a frightening one. It was simply a reminder: the dead are over there. The gods are watching. The scribe pulls his sheet up slightly. He is not cold. He is simply adjusting. He looks at the stars for a while longer, then his eyes close. The stars continue without him. Chapter 11: The Dark Nile. The Nile at night was a different river from the Nile of day. In the daytime, the river was activity. Ferry boats crossing the broad width of it, fishing boats moving in the shallows near the reed beds, larger trading vessels moving up and down with the current and the wind, children swimming in the shallower reaches near the bank, women doing laundry on the flat rocks near the water's edge, farmers checking their irrigation channels where the flood had receded to field level. But at night, the river became something else. Quieter, certainly, mostly empty of boats, though not entirely, and not by absolute prohibition. Darker. The water itself looked different at night, where in the day it was the greenish-brown of a large river carrying its load of silt and nutrients. At night it was dark enough to reflect the stars, and in still reaches where the current slowed, you could see the sky mirrored below you. The reeds were a sound environment of their own. Along the Nile banks, particularly in the marshy sections where the ground was still wet from the receded flood, papyrus reeds grew in dense stands that could reach several meters high. In the daytime, the reeds were alive with birds, herons and ibis, and the various small waterfowl that nested in them. At night, the birds were quieter but not absent. Frogs replaced them as the primary vocal presence. And in the reeds, in the mud at the water's edge, in the deeper channels where the river ran dark and fast between banks, the crocodiles. Nile crocodiles were abundant in ancient Egypt. They were genuinely enormous animals. A large adult Nile crocodile can reach 5 meters in length and weigh 700 kilograms, and they were powerful, fast in the water, and dangerous when encountered without preparation. Farmers who worked near the water's edge were aware of them. Fishermen who operated in small reed boats in the early morning and evening hours were aware of them. Children were kept away from the water's edge for this reason, among others. And yet the crocodile was also a god. Was the crocodile god of the Nile, the deity of the water itself, of the flood, of the fertility that the flood brought? He was depicted as a crocodile or as a man with a crocodile's head, wearing the double-plumed crown of a major deity. His cult center was in southern Egypt, where crocodiles were kept in pools in the temple precinct and mummified after death, but was worshipped all along the Nile because the Nile was everywhere. The crocodile's connection to the Nile's life-giving flood was not simply mythological metaphor. The Egyptians observed that crocodiles laid their eggs just above the annual flood line, which meant that the height at which crocodiles built their nests was, by long observation, an informal predictor of where the flood would reach. The crocodile was, in this practical sense, a living flood gauge. A fisherman who works the Nile at night, and some fishermen did, operating by torch or lamp in the early pre-dawn hours when certain fish were more active, understands the crocodile as a simultaneous practical and divine presence. You do not become careless about where your boat is positioned, especially in the reed banks where a crocodile might be resting. You develop a set of habits. You listen for the particular sound of a large animal in the reeds. You watch for the surface disturbance. You do not dangle your hands over the side of the boat. And you also know that this danger is inseparable from the gift. Is the Nile. The Nile is the crocodile. The flood that feeds the fields is the same force that moves in the dark water. Tonight there are no fishermen on this reach of the river. The current moves in the dark. The stars reflect in the still patches between the eddies. In the reeds near the bank, invisible, something large moves, a single slow displacement of water, the sound of reeds parting and then closing, then stillness. From somewhere across the river, the eastern bank, the living bank, the direction from which the first light will come in a few hours, there is a distant sound. It might be a drum, very soft, very far away. A festival, perhaps, at one of the smaller temples, or a guard's signal drum. Or simply the sound that the city makes in its sleep, the aggregate sound of thousands of lives in their houses, edited by distance to something like a heartbeat. The water moves. The reeds are still. The stars hang in the sky and their reflections hang in the water below. The jackal calls again from the western hill. Anubis, in the mythological understanding of this night, is not asleep either. Anubis is present in the underworld, where Ra's barque is currently making its passage. He is the guide. He is the one who leads the dead to the hall of judgment, where the heart of the deceased is weighed on a great scale against the feather of Maat, that fundamental principle of right order and truth. If the heart is heavy with wrongdoing, it sinks below the feather and is eaten by the composite beast, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, who waits beside the scale. If the heart is in balance, the soul passes through to the paradise of the afterlife. The Egyptians took very seriously the question of how one lived, not as an abstract moral principle, but as a cosmic accounting. The heart remembered everything. The weighing was real. A life of decency and correct conduct, the fulfillment of Maat in the personal and domestic sphere, was not merely a social virtue. It was preparation for a specific and inevitable judgment. The jackal's call echoes once more across the desert hills and then fades. The river moves in the dark. The stars hang above it. The frogs maintain their ancient continuous agreement about the night. Chapter 12. The Third Watch. The village is completely still now. The lamps in most of the windows have gone out. The oil was measured, and there is no point burning it through the small hours when everyone is sleeping. Here and there, in a window or a doorway, you can see the last amber glow of a wick burning low, nearly out. A few more minutes and those will be gone too. The street is empty. The dog that was sleeping near the gate has moved somewhere else, perhaps to a warmer spot, perhaps to the midden at the village's north end where the refuse was thrown and where rats and mice were reliable. The gate itself is closed now, not locked with a key but pushed shut against its stone stop, the wooden bar down. If you walk through the village at this hour, and we will walk through it together, slowly, unhurried, there is nowhere to be and nothing required of us. You notice the way the absorbs sound. The houses are very close together, their walls sharing, and in the daytime this creates a kind of resonating chamber for the village sounds. Voices carry further than you might expect, and the sounds of cooking and children and animals blend into the ambient noise of the settlement. But at night, with the sources of that noise all silenced or moved inside and behind closed doors, the acts instead as insulation. The village is enclosed in its own quiet. Your footsteps are soft on the packed earth. The stones of the path are visible in the starlight, pale limestone, barely lighter than the ground around them, but enough to navigate by if your eyes have adjusted. And at this hour, in this darkness, eyes do adjust. Within perhaps 20 minutes of being outside, the darkness resolves into a comprehensible landscape, each thing visible in its degree of pale or dark, nothing precise but nothing completely hidden either. A house to your left has a small window with an open wooden shutter. Through it you can hear breathing, the slow, deep breathing of sleep, more than one person, rhythmic and unconscious, the sound of a household at rest. There is something in that sound, its innocence, its completeness, the way sleep reduces people to their most fundamental state, that is oddly moving even to a stranger passing in the dark outside. You continue to the end of the village. Here at the southern boundary, there is a small open space, not a proper square, just the gap where the last row of houses ends before the enclosure wall. A few storage jars are stacked against the wall. A grinding stone leans against a house foundation. Beyond the enclosure wall, the southern end of the valley. The desert starts almost immediately where the floodplain ends, and at el-Medina, the floodplain barely exists at all, because the village is in a valley in the desert hills rather than on the river's edge. The valley floor is dry. There is sand, and there are rocks, and there are the dim shapes of the low hills rising on either side. The sky overhead, visible from this small open space, is vast. On the temple roof across the river, in the city you cannot see from here, the hour priest is at his post. He has just recorded the passing of the 9th night hour. 3 more remain. Dawn is 3 hours away. 3 hours of night is a great deal of night when you are awake and counting. But you are not counting. You are not watching anything, not measuring anything. You are simply here, in the mild dark, in the silence of a sleeping village, in the year approximately 1300 before the Common Era, under a sky that has not changed in its fundamental arrangement since long before the first human being looked up at it. The hour priest on the temple roof knows the name of the hour. He has a word for this point in the night, the third watch, the deepest point of the darkness, the hour when the barque is in the furthest reaches of the underworld. He knows exactly where he is in the night's journey, but you do not need a name for it. You only need to be in it. The night is still. The frogs are still singing, but they are a long way away from here. The Nile is several kilometers to the east, and the sound of frogs carries in the still air but fades with distance. What remains is not silence exactly, but something close to it, the very low ambient sound of a world at rest. Wind, perhaps, a faint breath moving through the valley, not enough to stir anything, just the gentle circulation of air between the warm desert and the cooler river. The occasional quiet cry of a night bird far overhead passing through, and somewhere on the western hill, out of sight above the cliff line that marks the edge of the el-Medina valley, there is, if you can hear it with the right kind of attention, a scratching sound, very faint, very periodic, the sound of metal on limestone. Something is happening up there, but we will come to that in a moment. For now, breathe, rest. Let the stillness of the village be your stillness. The deep night is yours. Chapter 13. The Other Work. Not everyone in this valley is sleeping. By the era of IX, who will come a century or so after the reign we have been inhabiting tonight, the great days of the royal tomb construction have begun to decline. The empire is contracting. Tax revenues are falling. The grain rations that arrived reliably every month in earlier generations have begun to be delayed, sometimes by weeks, sometimes longer. The workers of el-Medina, those skilled artisans who have spent their entire working lives cutting and painting in the dark of the royal tombs, know what is in those tombs. They have, in fact, made most of what is in those tombs. The legal papyri of the late New Kingdom, particularly the papyrus, and the documents known as Papyrus A and Papyrus B, now housed in the Liverpool Museum, record a remarkable period when the workers turned from building the royal tombs to plundering them. The trials were held. The confessions were extracted in some cases under beatings. The details in those confessions are specific and vivid. The robbers described entering at night, breaking through sealed doors, stripping the mummies of their gold, carrying objects away by torchlight. The language of the confessions has a particular quality, as if the recitation of what was done and what was taken was itself a form of accounting. In the valley tonight, above the cliff line, a figure moves. He knows this hill. He was born in this village. He has walked these paths from childhood. He knows where the western hills' limestone shifts from hard to soft, where the dry watercourse can be followed up through the rocks without leaving footprints in softer ground, where the entrance to the older tomb is masked by a limestone fall that looks natural unless you know it isn't. He carries a small clay lamp. He has wrapped it in a fold of linen to mask the light, not because anyone is watching, but because the habit of secrecy has become so deep that it operates even when there is no one to see. The lamp is very dim anyway, barely more than a glow. The and papyri record the actual words of the accused. There was a man named, and a man named, and several others whose names the scribes wrote down in hieratic on their papyrus notepads as the men spoke, under the mild or less mild pressure of interrogation. They described the tombs they entered, the quantities of gold they found, where they sold the objects to merchants in the city, to goldsmiths who asked no questions, to boat owners who carried goods up and down the river without examining them too carefully. The total weight of precious metal described in the confessions was very large. The pharaohs had been burying gold for a very long time. We will not follow this man up the hill. We have established him as a presence in this night, a reminder that the history of this place was not simply the official story, not simply the pious texts and the correct rituals and the water clocks on the temple roof. People stole. People made practical calculations. People held in one hand the belief that the gods would weigh their hearts at death, and in the other hand held a bronze chisel and calculated the weight of the lapis lazuli in the dark. This too was part of the human night in ancient Egypt. The same village that placed its best figures above the bedroom doors and prayed for protection in the hours of darkness, also, in some of its houses, harbored the quiet knowledge of another commerce. The documents were found. The trials were held. Most of the accused were convicted. Some of them were executed, but the tombs were empty. The lamp flickers once and is still. Chapter 14. The Deep Night. It is very late now, or very early. The border between those descriptions has ceased to mean anything. The hour priest on the temple roof is cold. Not suffering cold, not in danger, but the kind of cold that settles into the bone after sitting still for several hours in the night air of the desert, when the stone beneath you has given all the warmth it absorbed in the day and is now drawing heat from you instead. He shifts on his bench. He rolls his shoulders. He brings the lamp closer for a moment, holding his hands near the flame. He checks the water clock. The level has fallen to the mark that indicates the 10th hour of the night. 2 more hours, maybe less. The sky to the east is still completely dark, but he knows from years of this watch that the darkness before dawn has a quality to it that is different from the darkness of midnight. He cannot explain it in terms that would satisfy a natural philosopher, but he knows it. The darkness just before dawn is somehow a different color. In the village of el-Medina, the night is at its deepest. The last lamp has gone out. The dog that was near the gate earlier is back, curled at the base of the enclosure wall with its nose tucked into its own fur. Its breathing is the slow breathing of deep sleep. In the entrance room of the foreman's house, the house near the gate, larger than the others by 1 extra room, the perquisite of his position, the household shrine is lit by nothing. The lamp beside the Bess figure is dark. Bess himself, painted in and red on the plastered limestone above the threshold, is invisible in the dark. But he is there. He is always there. His eyes don't close. The children in the scribe's house are sleeping deeply, mouths slightly open, the total unconsciousness of children who are not troubled by the night. The scribe's wife has drawn both of them closer in her sleep, an instinctive arrangement. One child's arm has fallen across her shoulder. She does not wake. The scribe himself has dreamed something and has surfaced briefly, not quite awake, floating in the warm intermediate space between sleep and waking that the Egyptians recognized and had a word for a liminal state in which the Ba, the traveling soul, was not quite gone and not quite returned. In this state, things can be perceived that waking consciousness cannot hold. Some people, trained in the interpretation of these states, could navigate them deliberately. Most people simply passed through, barely noticing, and were asleep again in moments. The scribe turns over on his mat. The headrest shifts. He adjusts it without waking. The frog chorus from the Nile has modulated slightly, not lessened, but changed in texture, as it sometimes does in the deep night for reasons that no one in this period can fully explain. The voices of different species become more or less prominent at different hours. The sound of the river at midnight is different from the sound of the river at the 3rd hour, which is different again from the sound in the hour before dawn. If you have listened to it for many years, you know these shifts the way you know the face of someone you love, not by analysis, but by long familiarity. A single dog somewhere in the city across the river begins to bark. Not frantically, not the bark of alarm, but the repetitive territorial bark of a dog that has heard something and is announcing itself. After a few cycles, it stops. The night returns to its silence. In the underworld, in the 11th hour of Ra's journey, the barque is approaching the final gate. The guardian of this gate has a name that must be spoken correctly. The guards who row the barque are poised. The serpent, the chaos force that attacks Ra every night with enormous violence and must be repelled every night, has been defeated again, as it is defeated every night, as it will be defeated every night from now until the end of things. The arrows of the sun's defenders have driven it back. It is coiling in the dark beyond the passage, its tremendous body retreating. The barque moves on. In the 12th hour, the last, the transformation chamber. This is where the sun god is reborn from the body of the old night into the body of the new day. The hieroglyphic texts on the tomb wall describe it as a process like breath. The old form is exhaled, the new form is inhaled. In, out, dark, light, dead, living. The sky above the Nile Valley is still completely dark, but underneath it, the most important thing in the world is about to happen. Chapter 15: The Promise of Dawn. It begins not with light, but with something before light. The priest on the temple roof has been watching the eastern horizon for the past half hour. He knows what to look for. He has seen it hundreds of times, and yet every time there is something, he would not call it awe. He is a professional, a trained observer. He has ritualized this experience into procedure, but something that is adjacent to awe, that exists beneath the procedural calm, that he notices and does not speak of. The eastern horizon, before first light, develops a kind of weight to it. The stars near it begin to seem slightly less absolute, not dimmer, not visibly changed, but they have a quality of being almost overwhelmed, as if something enormous is pressing against the back of the sky and the sky is only barely holding it. And then, at the exact margin of human perception, in the exact zone between seeing and not seeing, a deepening, a darkening, paradoxically, before the brightening. A band of deep blue-black along the eastern horizon that is different from the night sky above it, richer, denser, somehow more intentional. The Egyptians had a color word for this, a word for the dark before dawn, for the blue that precedes everything else. We don't have a clean translation. In the temple, the morning liturgy is beginning. The priest descends from the pylon roof. In the inner sanctuary, another priest is preparing the morning ritual, the awakening of the god. The shrine will be unsealed. The statue will be offered water, linen, incense. The morning incense will be burning, frankincense this time, the clean, bright, resinous smoke that belongs to the first light. In the village, the rooster has not crowed yet. That sound, the flat, declarative cry of a rooster in the pre-dawn dark, will come soon. It always comes a few minutes before the sky begins to visibly brighten, as if the bird perceives something in the air that human senses need more time to register. But first, the other sounds. The frog chorus, which has been continuous through the night, begins to change register. Individual frog voices drop out, replaced by others. The texture shifts, not louder or quieter, different. The frogs know what is coming. The ibis on the Nile bank stirs. There is a sound of wings briefly, and then the distinctive call, a low, slightly hoarse sound, not musical but present, and then the ibis is silent again, listening. The sky is still dark, but the east is different. In the houses of el-Medina, the sleeping families begin to shift. Not waking, not yet. The next hour will bring that, but the quality of sleep changes in the pre-dawn. It becomes lighter, more permeable, the dreams closer to the surface. The bar that has been traveling through the night begins to return. The soul comes home. A woman in the village, not anyone we have named, just someone, one of the many women who will be up first, opens her door and looks out. The street is grey dark, the sky overhead still full of stars, but she can feel the air changing. The quality of the dark is different from the dark of midnight. She goes back inside and begins to fill the grinding bowl. The rhythm of the day is beginning, even though the day itself has not quite arrived. The hour priest on the temple roof records the 12th hour in his log. He sets down the stylus. He looks east. The band of darker blue-black on the horizon has developed a faint distinction at its upper edge, a separation from the sky above it that is almost colorless, almost nothing, and is everything. Dawn is a few minutes away. In the underworld, in the 12th chamber, the transformation is complete. The solar barque has traveled through all 12 gates. Ra and Osiris have separated again, each returning to his own domain. The old sun, the dark, dead, nighttime form of the solar god, has given way to the new sun, the reborn morning deity, the scarab-headed form of Ra who represents the sun at the moment of its birth. The barque reaches the end of its journey. Nut opens. The goddess of the sky, whose body has held the sun through the entire night, releases it. The great arched figure, spangled with stars, gives birth, as she does every morning, as she has done every morning from the beginning, to the small, bright, irresistible disk of the morning sun. It is not sunrise yet, but it is going to be. It is going to be in about 3 minutes. The first color reaches the eastern horizon above Thebes, not the orange of the sun itself, not yet, but the deep amber that precedes it, warming the underside of clouds that you did not know were there until they began to glow. The horizon begins to distinguish itself from the sky above it. There is east, there is west, there is up. The world is reassembling itself. In the village, the rooster crows. It is a sound that has opened every human morning for tens of thousands of years. It is the same sound in every language, every culture, every century. It is the sound of the day announcing itself. The scribe's children on the rooftop stir in their sleep. The girl opens one eye, registers light, closes it again. The boy pulls his sheet more firmly over his head. They will not be up for another half hour. They are deeply, completely asleep, in that absolute last hour of the night sleep that only children can achieve, that adults remember wistfully. The scribe is awake. He has been half awake for a few minutes, suspended in the pleasant state between sleep and morning, feeling the warmth of his family around him on the mat. He opens his eyes and sees the sky above him beginning to change, the stars fading, the blue deepening, and then paradoxically lightening, the vault of the night retreating upward as the dome of the day advances from the east. He lies still for a moment. He is thinking about nothing in particular. Just lying on the roof at dawn, feeling the mat beneath him and the slight coolness of the air and the sound of the birds beginning, now all at once, as they always do, a sudden arrival of bird voices from the Nile direction, the ibis and the herons and the various smaller birds waking into the pale morning. The first direct sunlight touches the top of the pylon at the temple of Amun. Just the top, just the highest point of the stone, catching the horizontal rays of the sun while everything below is still in the blue pre-dawn. The stone glows briefly orange, then gold. The color descends. The second course of the pylon is lit. The third, the shadow retreats. The morning has arrived. In the temples, in all the temples, the morning liturgy is being completed. The statue of the god has been clothed and fed and addressed with the proper morning hymns. The morning incense, frankincense, clean and bright and solar, is rising from the altar. The god is awake. Maat has been maintained through another night of darkness and voyage and return. The world will continue. This is certain because it has been made certain, because the rituals were performed and the order was kept, and the priest watched through the night and marked the hours, and the sun has risen as it always rises, and will rise tomorrow, and will rise on the morning after that, as long as the world has an east, and the goddess nut arches overhead, and the solar barque completes its journey. In the village, smoke begins to rise from the first cooking fire. The sound of grinding begins slow, rhythmic, utterly familiar. A child's voice, awake now, asking something in the bright morning tone that children use when they have slept completely and woken into a world that is simply, unproblematically, itself. Another voice answers, "The day is beginning." Chapter 16, The Long River. Before you go, before we leave this night together, stay just a moment longer. The sun is fully up now. The shadows have shortened to mere hints at the base of the walls. The heat is beginning its return, the slow daily accumulation of warmth that will peak in the early afternoon and then begin its long decline toward the evening, toward the moment when the sun reaches the western cliff and descends, and the lamps are lit again. The Nile is flowing. It is always flowing. Even in the season when the flood has receded and the water level is at its lowest, the river continues, a wide, patient, brown-green presence moving north to the sea, carrying its load of fine Nile silt, receiving its tributary streams from deep in Africa, giving water and fish and the particular gift of its annual flood to the people who live along its banks. The workers of el-Medina are already on the path. The foreman has counted them. They have the tools. They are walking west in the early morning cool toward the valley, toward the limestone cliffs, toward the painted chambers they are building underground. They walk in a loose group, not hurrying. The path is familiar. The air at this hour is the best air of the day, still holding some of the night's cool, clear, and direct. They will work until noon, then rest in the shade during the hottest part of the day. This was standard practice, documented in the ostraca of el-Medina, where workers recorded their own rest periods with an almost modern bureaucratic specificity. Then work again in the late afternoon. Then the walk home again as the shadows lengthen. It will be the same tomorrow. It will be roughly the same for the 3,000 years of Egyptian civilization that preceded this moment, and it will be roughly the same, allowing for the enormous changes that centuries bring for decades more. The Nile will flood. The workers will cut the stone. The priests will burn the incense. The hour priest will watch the stars from the temple roof. The families will eat bread and drink beer by lamplight in the evenings. The children will wake from bad dreams and be comforted and return to sleep. The Ba will travel through the night and return in the morning. Bes will stand above the doorways with his tongue out, watching. Ra will travel through the 12 gates of the underworld and be reborn at dawn. The pattern is very old. The people who lived it were very specific. They had names. They had families and habits and worries. They had the particular texture of lives lived in houses we can partly reconstruct from what the desert has preserved. The foreman of the late New Kingdom, who was one of the more colorful figures in the el-Medina records, accused of theft and general bad behavior in an extraordinary court document, was a real person who ate real bread and slept on a real sleeping platform. The scribe of the village who lived in the reigns of Ai and Seti Ai was not only a real person, but a person whose handwriting survives on papyrus. We can see how he formed his letters. We know he owned the Chester Dream Papyrus. We know he had opinions. Was a real foreman of the left gang who appears in the records in the 14th century BCE, long before our period. These were people. And this, the Nile, the stone, the lamplight, the stars, the sound of frogs, the smell of at evening, the best figure above the door, the water clock dripping in the dark, this was their world. It was a world of extraordinary beauty and considerable hardship, of profound religious imagination and very practical daily concerns. It was a world where the cosmic and the domestic existed in the same space. The same family that believed the sun traveled through the underworld every night also brewed its beer and negotiated with its neighbors about the shared tabun oven and grumbled about the grain rations being late. That is what civilizations are. That is what people are. Chapter 17. Into the Dark. We do not need to leave, not yet. The day has begun out there in Thebes, in el-Medina, in the long valley of the Nile, but here, where you are, the night is still present, or you are making it present. You are choosing to stay a little longer in the warm dark of this ancient world. Let the sounds of this night come to you now, not as separate things to identify, but as a continuous texture. The frogs near the Nile, low, repetitive, always present, the sound underneath every other sound. The wind in the reeds, barely audible, a sigh rather than a breath. Somewhere far away, the low call of a night bird once. The sound of someone sleeping in the house beside you, their breathing slow and deep and untroubled, the breathing of complete rest. The lamp has gone out. The castor oil is finished. The wick has burned its last and the flame has narrowed to a thread and then gone. The room is not frightening in this dark. You know it. You know where the walls are. You know where the sleeping platform is beneath you. You know the smell of this room, the particular mineral vegetable warm smell of a house that has been lived in for years. The headrest is beneath your neck. It is a familiar thing, worn smooth by many nights. Your head is supported. Your neck is at ease. Your body is as it has always been at the end of a long day, ready. The best figure above the door cannot be seen now in this dark, but he is there. The small Bess, wide-eyed, tongue out, fierce with protection, is watching. He has been watching every night since the house was built. He has not missed one. Outside, the stars are there in their thousands and tens of thousands, the full dark sky of ancient Egypt untouched by any modern light, with the Milky Way crossing it from south to north, the body of Nut arched over the entire world. Orion Star is moving through her. Sirius is approaching the horizon. The Decans are turning in their slow procession as they have turned every night since long before there were people to name them. And underneath all of this, underneath the desert, underneath the valley, underneath the limestone hills, the barque is moving. Ra is in the underworld. He is making his way through the 12 gates. At the center of the night, he has merged with Osiris in that sacred, secret union, and he is moving now toward the east. He is almost at the last gate. Nut is waiting. The sun will rise. You do not need to be awake to see it. You will not miss it. It has risen every morning that has ever been, and it will rise again in a few hours, and the world will be remade as it is remade every day, and the workers will walk their path to the valley, and the priest will complete his morning liturgy, and the children will wake and ask for bread, and the Nile will continue its slow and patient journey north. All of this will happen. It does not need you to watch it. What it needs from you right now, what the night asks of you, is only this: to let go. To let the day you have carried release from your hands. To let your body be heavy and your breathing slow and your mind move gently away from the edges of thought and toward the open center where nothing is required. The frogs are still singing. The river is still moving. The stars are still turning overhead, the same stars that the Egyptian hour priest watched from his stone roof, the same stars the scribe lay on his rooftop and saw reflected in his own thought, the same stars that have been keeping their ancient appointments in the sky since before anyone was here to notice. You are lying in the dark, and the dark is full. Let your breath slow. Let the weight of your body grow heavier, sinking into whatever is beneath you, into the mat, into the warmth, into the old comfortable darkness of sleep. The Nile is flowing. Ra is in the underworld, Nut is watching, and you are already drifting. Let it come. The night is very long and very quiet. The stars are numerous beyond counting. The world is in order. Sleep. End of script. Video 7. A Night in Ancient Egypt.